Hey, how's it going? I'm Becky Saif. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to show you how to use Ableton 11's audio effect track to sound sculpt your music and speed up your workflow. As always, the timestamps are below in the description, so if you want to skip to your favorite section, feel free to do so. And I just want to let you know that a lot of you have been asking about merchandise, and I've managed to put some together. So if you want to check out the merchandise as well, featuring Jez the Giraffe, if you're on my Twitch streams, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But check the links below and you can find the merch through my website as well. All right, let's jump into Ableton. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is get your audio effect track, and you can come to audio effects and type in audio effect rack. Utilities, audio effect track. I'm going to drag it onto the drums. This is a track that I started working on this morning. So it's in its pretty early stages, but I've dragged the audio effect track onto the drums. And what I'm going to do is we're going to create two chains, and we're going to automate using the macros. And this is really great because it will help to speed up the automation on your groups, especially, or even on your channels if you want to stick an audio effect track on your channels. And you can just start to sound sculpt on the fly rather than doing something like automation. So open up your audio effect track and right click to create a chain, and right click, create a chain. And now you have two chains and you can rename them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a dry and a wet signal on the drum bus. So rename is Control or Command R, and I'm going to do dry and Control or Command R and wet. We have to do it in capital letters, OCD. Now, an interesting thing about this is because we've doubled up the chains, this is now running in parallel. And what we've done is we've created two copies of the same signal. So we've actually increased the volume of the track. So if I turn this off and play the drums just by themselves and then turn it on, you'll hear that it increases in volume. So we've increased the volume of the track, and actually what you can do to get it back to the same volume is you can do -6 dB on the first chain and -6 dB on the second chain. And now that's going to make them the same volume whether the audio effect track is on or off. So it sounds exactly the same. And there's a reason for this. When we start adding our effects to the wet chain, what we're going to do is we're going to actually have them disabled to start with. And we're going to use the macros to automate and enable them. So when they're both in the dry position, both chains, we want them to be at the default volume that we've set our bus at. All right, so now we're going to add our effects to the wet chain. And what you want to do is come into your audio effects. And this is totally up to you. I'm going to go with a grain delay. Drag it onto the chain, the wet chain. So drop your audio effects here. Don't drop them outside here because they're not actually inside the audio effect track. So you can't control them and contain them inside the audio effect track. So just make sure you drag it on the right of the chain that you want to drop it on. Okay, cool. Grain delay. Next one I want to do is auto filter. Drag the auto filter down onto the wet chain. And the next is reverb. Make sure you're dragging it inside the rack. Also, you can double click on the top bars to close them down just for kind of keeping it tidy. And the last one I want to do is the compressor. And drag it inside there like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to map different parameters of these effects to the macros. To get your macros, you click here, this little round button, and now you have your macros. Now with Ableton Live 11, you have the option to increase your macros all the way up to 16. But they've also implemented a reduction in macros as well, which is really handy because having one macro is actually all you need sometimes. So your macro, you can change the name of it. So Control or Command R, and we can call this the wet chain. You can also change the color of it if you right click, and you can do pink because I'm a girl. That's a stereotype. Let's go with blue, because I'm also still a girl. But that is now a macro, one single macro, and we're going to use this macro to modulate the different parameters of the effects. All right. Open it up. And the first thing I want to do is I want to map this one macro to all of the on-off switches of the audio effects. So when it's down at 0, these two chains, I want to be outputting dry signals. And when we start to move this macro up, that's when the audio effects turn on and the parameters start to move. So go to your on-off switches of your audio effects, right-click on them and map them to the wet macro. And you can see now that it's changed and it's gone all the way up to 127, which is the top of the range of that macro. If you move the macro down, you can see on the grain delay now, this is turned on, and as soon as it moves, it turns off. So now we're turning on and off our grain delay. So let's do the rest. So map to wet, map to wet, just double click on them to close them down, map to wet. And now they all have this green dot on the on-off switch, which means they're mapped. And this control now is turning all of the audio effects on and off. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we want to assign this one macro to the different parameters of the effects that we want to control. So on this wet chain, what I want to create is kind of a influx of effects, but high pass it at the same time. So it's kind of like building that tension as we reach the end of the phrase or the section of music. So as the drums are playing, we want to create that kind of whoosh, high pass filter movement. So I'm going to assign this macro to the hertz of the grain delay and also the percentage. And on the auto filter, we're going to change it to a high pass filter. We're going to assign the frequency to the wet. We're going to assign the resonance to the wet. And then on the reverb, I'm going to apply it to the dry wet. So we're increasing the amount of wet reverb that's filling the space. And because it's high passing at the same time, it's not going to create any muddiness in the low end. So map to the wet. And then on the compressor, I'm going to map it to the threshold and to the output. Now let's listen to what we have. And it's going to sound a little bit strange at the moment because I will warn you, the macro map needs to be edited, but let's have a little listen to what it sounds like. So you can see there, especially on the compressor, what's actually happening is the threshold is going up as well as the output. We don't want that. We want it to go in the reverse order. So you can start to edit all of these parameters by going into the macro map. And the map is here. And now you have all of the different ranges that you've set. If we go on to the compressor, let's start with this one. And we're going to actually reduce the max and increase the minimum on the output gain. And we're going to do the same. We're not going to do it as much, actually. We don't want that threshold to be so high. All right, so on the compressor, now as we move the macro, you can see that it's really increasing that compression. It's bringing the threshold right down. I'm going to come out of the macro map. I'm just going to increase the ratio a little bit. So now it's really hard on that compression as it's coming down. All right, let's go into the reverb. And the reverb, you want to go from dry to wet. I actually want to have it like that. I want it to go 100% wet on the reverb, so I'm going to leave that. Go on to the auto filter. Let's have a look at how this is moving. Okay, that's a little bit too much on the resonance. So let's go back into the macro map and we're going to go to the resonance, which is here. And let's just bring the maximum value down. Let's have a look at that. Probably still a little bit too much. And I actually don't want the high pass filter to go all the way up to 20 kilohertz as well. So come up here and reduce that down. You want some of the frequencies to come through, even if you're right at the end of the phrase of the bar that you're automating right now. And finally, onto the grain delay. Let's have a look at that. Yeah, that's moving quite a lot. So let's look on the grain delay, the frequency. So the frequency, maybe let's bring that down and bring it up so that it's just a little bit closer together. So now this movement on the wet chain is not going to sound so drastic, but what it's going to do with one knob, with one macro, you can now automate all of these different parameters just on the fly. Let's have a listen to the drums, and we're going to move this macro as the drums are progressing to the end of the section. All right, back into the macro map, and we can see here that the device on is actually starting at the range value of 64 for all of the audio effects. And that is why it suddenly came in with all of the effects. And actually, we want that to start from 0. So go to your device on and bring them all down to 0. And now it's going to be a little bit more smoother. All the devices are going to turn on as soon as you move the macro. You can hear there how we've created a automated whooshing filter of effects using the audio effect rack, and none of this is being done using automation. That's cleaner and tidier. It speeds up workflow. And the best part about this is you can now save it to use time and time again on other groups and channels. So you don't need to start building these racks every time. You can just use them again and again. It will add to your artist identity as well if you're using the same audio effect racks. So to save it, you click the save button here and it will go into presets, audio effects, and audio effect rack. And you can save this as, I'm going to just do auto filter, and it's there for you to now drag and drop onto your groups without having to rebuild it. If you want to access it quickly, you can right click on your rack and you can add it to one of your collections on the top right here by just selecting a color. If I select racks, it's now going to be in my racks, which is really, really cool. And that is how you use Ableton 11's audio effect rack. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like it and subscribe to the channel. Drop me a comment as well, as it helps the YouTube algorithm and it gets my videos out to more people like you, and it helps the channel grow as well. So I would really, really appreciate it. Check all the links below if you want to find out more from me. I'm Becky Saif, and I will see you for another video. Bye. See you. See you later. Bye.